Is this going to be available to people later?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
In the same platform, it will be uploaded after just completion of this session.
Yeah.
Sir, recording also, I think, you need to switch on.
Yeah. So, Monica, ready?
Yeah. Okay, a very good morning to all my participants, and hello to the participants who are joining from different parts of the globe. I welcome you to the third live session of the Life Skill MOOC for Engineers Level 1. So this third live session is basically based on the module which we are covering in week 3, where we are talking about critical thinking. We are focusing on critical thinking, paradigms, critical thinking, ways and means of critical thinking, and critical thinking specifically in engineering, along with the case studies we are discussing in the engineering section about the critical thinking. So this is basically a kind of, the things which we have covered in the modules, which you must have gone through, or you must be going through during the weekend and attempting the quiz also. So today we have with us the instructor of this week, Dr. Sunita Mishra. She is professor and head Center for English Language Studies in University of Hyderabad, which is in Hyderabad in India. So she is the expert of today's session also, and she is with us. I welcome you, ma'am, for this session on my behalf of all the participants and Life Skill MOOC team for taking out time to be with us and guide us more about the critical thinking aspect. She'll be talking about understanding critical thinking with all of us. So I'll request you to stay tuned, and now handing over the session to Dr. Sunita Mishra for enlightening us more on the topic of critical thinking. You can also note down your questions or put them in the chat box or question and answer box so that we can take it at the end of the session. Please put as many questions you want to discuss or you have doubts under the module. Keep putting in the question answer box or in the chat box as convenient, or you can raise hands also later on. We can take one by one all the questions. Ma'am, over to you. Maybe for 30 minutes, and then we can go for the question and answer session.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much, Monica. And again, a very warm welcome to all the participants who are here with us today. Yeah. Today's session is, I just wanted to tell when Monica was mentioning, is slightly different from what we have in the modules which you have there. In the sense that, the modules were recorded 2 years ago, 3 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And since then, I also have come across a few things. My students have been reading and writing, and we have been thinking. And I thought in today's meeting, I will present a few perspectives which are a little different, a little I don't know whether to call it advanced, but it is a little different from what is there in the in the sessions which you are watching as part of the course. Maybe in some ways you can take back this understanding of critical thinking. I mean, that is this discussion, I wouldn't say understanding of critical thinking, into I mean, whatever we are doing in the modules, and apply it and see how it can have different implications after you attend the session. Now, I personally prefer to have a very interactive session right from the beginning. Maybe I'll speak, as Monica said, for half an hour, but even in that half an hour's time, if you have any question, if you want me to elaborate on something, or if you want to stop me and discuss about something, please do so. You're welcome to do so. I believe that any kind of session like this can happen only if we discuss things. So please stop me and talk to me whenever you feel like. Today's session is titled Understanding Critical Thinking. In my sessions over there in the course module, I have been talking about the different tools that are used in critical thinking. I've been talking about the different paradigms which have been used to analyze critical thinking. And finally, I have put two case studies which are specific to the field of engineering, trying to show how critical thinking is being applied over there. Now, in today's session, I was planning to talk a little bit about how we need to critically understand critical thinking also. Right? If we are learning critical thinking, we should be able to critically understand critical thinking also as a concept. And as part of that, I found that it is very interesting to see that critical thinking has been looked at as a homogeneous, as a given, as a commonsensical platform. Right? We all think that, yeah, critical thinking is something that is obvious. Critical thinking, that is something that can be homogeneous, that is applicable to everybody, and it can be understood by everybody in one way or the other. But if you look at it, critical thinking also can mean different things to different people. In the very much the way that, common sense is a very problematic term. Would you agree with me there? That common sense is a very, very problematic term. We think, most of the problematic concepts in society, in everyday day-to-day life, goes under the cover, under the carpet of common sense understanding. But common sense understanding always, what I would try to say here is also one kind of understanding, one way of looking at things is commonsensical. So commonsensical understanding or common sense understanding is one person's understanding or one group's understanding. It need not be the same for everybody. In a very similar way, critical thinking also can be very problematic at times. And if we are doing critical thinking, we have to be aware that this concept can become problematic unless we understand it appropriately. Before I go into the problematic aspects, what I thought here was I would just talk a little bit about the framework of critical thinking, which I find very useful and which can be understood very easily, is Bruce Williams' matrix of critical thinking. This I have discussed in detail in my modules, which Bruce Williams basically says that the important features in critical thinking is understanding information. Very important. We get information, but we have to understand it. Generating insight. We get the information, but from the information, we have to be able to generate, put the information in a certain kind of relationship, infer, make analogies, evaluate the information, judge the information, and only then we can discern what is called implications. Okay, this is the information. This is the insight I get from the information. So what are the implications of this information and the insight on the information for me and for my situation? So understanding information, generating insight, and discerning implications. These are the three important factors. And I'm taking this paradigm because I find it very manageable. In a certain sense, I find it very manageable. And if understanding, generating insight, and discerning implications are the three ways of looking at, of going about critical thinking, we have these four as the tools we can use to do all these. We can observe to get the information. Observation can also be one of not just getting information, but organizing information. And then we need to put in our experience to, first of all, organize it and also get insights from the experience, insights from the information, and finally, to also arrive at the implications of the information. Reflection and reasoning are more, again, they are part of Reflection, I would say, is more part of understanding the information that is given, for understanding the implications of the information that is given, and reasoning is both part of organizing the information and understanding the information, gaining insight into the information. Now, if you ask me, all these four go into every part of the information processing, business. It is not that you only observe and you don't reason. It is not that you reflect and you don't observe. They go on simultaneously. Although we have put them as four different skills, they overlap and they go on simultaneously. This is what is generally understood. But when we conduct experiments, when we read up what people think of critical thinking skills, we find that people in different parts of the world understand critical thinking skills very differently. There was a study conducted where people were asked about what they thought were critical thinking skills, and many of them did not have ready-made answers, and some gave very different answers. Have a look at them. Yeah. There was the study conducted where they have work in Japan, work in New Zealand, where they say that something like intuition and something like positive thinking forms part of critical thinking skills. Very different from the way we understand it in the mainstream understanding of critical thinking skills. Right? So this is just a window to tell us that critical thinking skills can sometimes be understood very differently. Critical thinking skills can mean different things for different people. So understanding it, thinking of it, interpreting it as a kind of a carpet term, as a kind of a given, can become problematic at times. Yes. So I proceed in this way from here, where you see this. There are some more definitions of critical thinking skills which I've given here, which talks about correct assessment. It's a mistake over here. Correct assessment of statements. And secondly, skilled and active interpretation of observations and communications, information and argumentation. Now, the problem comes when we say it is the critical thinking skill is a correct assessing of situations or statements. But what is correct assessing? There cannot be one given correct assessing. It is not a multiple choice question where you tick one and you say, yes, this is the correct assessment. And this is what critical thinking says. Critical thinking says, because that exactly is the problem. We know that different people in different cultural contexts in different countries will tick different points as what they think is correct assessment. Depending on how they perceive society, depending on how they perceive themselves, depending on how they cut up the phenomenon around them. Okay, but all of you will agree that we do not, all of us don't see what is around us in a similar way. Our society, our culture, our training trains us to cut up the reality which is there around us in different ways, to organize the reality that is around us in different ways. Now, when that becomes a truth, then how will you assess a certain situation? How will you collect information? How will you detect what is information? Do you realize that the very beginning can be problematic? What is your means? What is the parameter you are applying? What is the yardstick you are applying to decide that yes, this is information, this is not information? That itself, the discrimination, the process of assessment, the process of reflection starts from there itself. You start making your judgment from there itself. What is information? Like, for example, noise and sound. What is noise? What is sound? What do you hear? What do you not hear? Is a certain kind of noise, is it a sound which you recognize as sound, or is it just noise? Similarly, what is information? What is not information? Secondly, how do you organize this information? That again is something that our cultural setup, that our socio-political setup, that our training trains us to cut up information in a certain way. And finally, how do you understand the implications of this kind of organization of the reality around you? That also can differ from culture to culture. That also will depend on how you cut up the information around you, how you organize the information around you, what you think is information. Yes. Now let us look at how some people have looked at it. Please look at this information. Please look at this definition. Now this author, it's a she, by the way. They're talking of critical analysis. It's very difficult to think about. It is not an easy concept. It's a very, very abstract concept. Although we present it as something which is available to most people most of the times. And it is difficult primarily because it is also a relationship with texts, with family members, with friends, with teachers, with media, and even with the history of one's country. All these constitute the things around us. Now, all these in major ways determine what is critical thinking, how you perceive critical thinking, how you construct critical thinking. Okay, I'm sure we will have a good discussion on this later, but let me present it first. Okay, please look at this definition carefully. It is important for what we are going to do today. Now, this is something which I have been talking since the beginning. Critical thinking is presented as a given, as a commonsensical factor. But when we look at the previous description of critical thinking, we find that it is far from just being a given. It is far from just being a commonsensical term which can be taught like cycling to people. And that is what very often education assumes, that we can teach critical thinking to people. But then, how do you teach the critical thinking course which has been framed in a certain kind of socio-political context? And how can you teach it to another population which belongs to a very different kind of a socio-cultural setup and teach the same thing? We know people do not learn the similar way. We have seen it. If some of you are teachers, you would have noticed that in our classrooms also, not all students learn things similarly. Different students understand things differently. The same thing has different implications for students coming from different socio-political, cultural backgrounds. And this can happen within the same country, within the same region sometimes. Class makes a difference. The place you come from, the kind of family you come from makes a difference. So within all these variations, how do you construct the concept of critical thinking? Yes, and the fear that is very often expressed is that this way of understanding critical thinking as a carpet term can marginalize approaches to thought. Yes, it can sometimes not consider factors which become very important for a certain number of people. And what happens eventually in a society? It increases social inequalities. The position of the more powerful, the position of the dominant becomes the position, becomes the given position, becomes the position that we understand, that we project, that we state, that we document as critical thinking. I'll give you a very small example. This is something which one of my students narrated to me. He found it reported in a certain magazine and he brought it to my notice. This is something about what happened in Gujarat. Interestingly, people in Gujarat, I mean, water is a problem. All of us know that water is a problem in Gujarat. And we very often find in media, in all places, that going to collect water is a huge thing for the women in Gujarat. So what was the material that was taken up for data, that people have to work very long hours, women have to walk miles and miles, water is not generally available, we have to make water available, it's a basic necessity for people. So given this data, this was put together, and what was the implication that was drawn from the data? That water has to be made available within reach of people. And water was made available. A water pipe was set up in a certain village. The next day they found that all the women in the village came up and started agitating against. They were very angry. They started agitating. They started refusing to use a water tap. And when they went on to find out, when they went on to, make a search to find out what was it that caused so much agitation, the women told that, look, what you have done is harming us in a major way, because that process of going to collect water was the only time we had for ourselves. We could dress up, we could go out with our friends, with other women, talk, have time to ourselves, go collect water, and that was the only time we had to refresh. That was the only time we had to, to move away from the everyday family chores, which can be a very big burden. So what does this show? I was talking about it a while ago when I was trying to say that what we choose to be, data becomes very important. And when we are collecting so much data about the problems, maybe these people did not bother to go and ask the women themselves if they want a water source nearer. That did not constitute data. The need they had for an outing every day or twice a day, to go out with friends, talk to other women, and participate in a community of women and come back to their family chores, did not constitute data. So what happens? We collect data, we understand the relations, we understand the implications, but eventually what we do, the understanding of this data is drawn from what is generally understood to be commonsensical. And that is why I'm saying the word commonsensical can become very problematic, especially in non-European contexts, in non-Western contexts. For gender, for women, what is considered commonsensical in a society is very often what is commonsensical for people who are more understood, who are more visible, who are more audible in society. For me, something can be commonsensical, which is not commonsensical for somebody else. Okay, so we need to have these kinds of sensitivities. We need to have these kinds of understanding where something which looks completely normal to us may not at all be normal to somebody else. And in that context, where does critical thinking or critical understanding stand? Look at this quotation again. Fox goes on to talk to us about how we need to listen to the world around us, how we need to listen to voices which are not generally heard. I think we are running out of time. You can look at this at leisure. Very important for me here is this concept of academic argument, analytical writing. We talk about these again, like critical thinking, as very plain, commonsensical, given terms, given concepts, and we have to teach people what is a good piece of writing. But what we forget all along is that this can be a good way of writing, maybe for a very small population. There are other ways of writing, there are other ways of thinking, which may not be good for this population. So why is it that this one way of writing and thinking is being projected as a good way of writing or thinking? We just need to think a little more about these concepts. Now I'll go to two concepts: the notion of the individual, which can be very different in different societies. In Japan, for example, I'm giving this example because we understand the individual, we understand critical thinking, we understand thinking itself from a Western perspective generally. And Japan presents an example of something which is diametrically opposite, where understanding of things does not depend on what is right for the individual, but what is right in relation to the group's other group, to the group as a whole. So, acknowledging one's dependence on the group, acknowledging where one stands in relation to the other members of the group becomes very, very important in the Japanese society. So in that society, what will be projected as development, what will be projected as excellence, and what will be projected as right thinking? What will be data? How will data be organized? And how will the implications of that data be arrived at can become very different. We have to think of this when we are thinking of critical thinking. Another factor, self-expression. We give a lot of value to self-expression. We are going gaga, we are shouting at the top of our voices now, talking about communication skills. We're talking of how to improve communication skills, how to see to it that everybody talks and talks, knows how to talk, knows how to organize talk, knows how to reflect and express herself or himself. But we are forgetting that in many societies, talking is not the best thing. And look at what happens in Taiwan. Being quiet is considered polite and intelligent. Polite we can understand, but it is considered intelligent because in Taiwan, it is believed that only the insecure need to prove themselves by talking aloud. For that reason, in the schools, students are taught to keep quiet in the classroom. The society teaches that you need not talk unless you have to. So what do you do in a society like this? Definitely a person, yeah, I'm sure there are societies in India that have similar kinds of value systems. There are societies in Canada, I have read about that have this kind of a value system. So when a teacher, a father of a student who came from the, the Indian American population, his son was in the class, and the teacher told the father that, look, I'm very happy that your son talks a lot in the class, expresses himself a lot. And the father says, I'm so sorry. I'll see to it that he does not do this again. Okay, so we come from different societies where all these things mean different things. So we cannot assume that what is right for us, what is right for our way of thinking, is right for every society's way of thinking. And finally, I would like to end with saying this, that complex cognitive skills are learned only in context. So we cannot say that we will, teach something to students because it is supposed to be good in a certain kind of socio-cultural context, and we have to import it into our context and teach it. We can teach our students only when we understand what their society expects them to learn. And teaching can best be done in a very non-judgmental and a supportive atmosphere where people understand how others think, how that society thinks. And this is where one person, an educationist, Vygotsky, comes in a major way. He believes that learning can only happen in a socio-cultural context. Learning can only happen in a group which is supportive. Learning can only happen when we learn from our peers, when we learn from people around us, not when learning is just imported and thrust on us from outside. This is what I have to say today. We could have, gone on. Maybe there'll be other occasions to talk, but I would end my presentation here today. And Monica, can we welcome questions? How do we go about it?
Yes, ma'am. So first of all, to all the participants, we are right now in India, and asking question here in the classroom is considered very positive, and a question is never a funny question. Any question is a good question. So I'll request all of you to please post your questions. Don't um,
Hesitate.
don't hesitate or feel shy about sharing your questions. We are waiting for that. Ma'am, very useful, I think, presentation, because you've connected it with small anecdotes and the examples, which I think helped me also to understand this concept of critical thinking, because we also have read a lot about it. It's one of the major skills which now we are attempting to put it in, like, kind of groom our students with, because Bloom's taxonomy, if we refer to, also has this component of critical thinking. But I think somewhere the thing which is like carpeted thing, I think, helped me to understand and remove my barriers of the little understanding which I could get from you today. Was very wonderful for me.
Thank you. Thank
The
you
social
so much.
context, the way I think all the concepts are related is also very beautiful, because as a learner, I will say that it's very difficult to connect Vygotsky, Bloom, and then the critical thinking, and then the other aspects. So that you've done that very beautifully.
Thank you. Thank you. And
Thank you so much for
especially
this.
Harold Bloom. I have talked about Harold Bloom in my presentation, but personally, I have a problem with Harold Bloom, because look at the hierarchy that he creates also in thinking skills. Lower order thinking skills, higher order thinking skills. And what he creates as a hierarchy can be very problematic. Of course, he has revised it later, but the revised version also can be very problematic. If you are a teacher in the teaching context, you'll realize how problematic it can be sometimes. And thank you, Monica, very much.
Yes.
How do we take questions from the participants? Do they?
Ma'am, ma'am, one question is just come. Basically, I have requested all of them to put it in the chat box or question answer box.
So can I open the chat box?
Yes, I can read it also for you.
Okay.
Ma'am, you might like to close the presentation so that you're visible to us in a more
okay.
This thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. So there's Kwasi Baptiste. The question is it correct to say that a good critical thinker in one place can be considered as a person with poor critical thinking skills in another place?
Yes, I think that is what I was trying to tell today. Correct, very right. I mean, I might give my critical thinking, I might give my opinion, my very well-formed judgment, informed judgment, and I might be a fool in another context where people believe in very different things. Yes, I mean, I might be thinking of keeping sanitation, for example. I might think of cleanliness in one way, and I might say, yes, this is my informed judgment that I have to clean this place in a certain way. But believe me, this is a very simple example, common example I'm giving you. You go to another place and talk about your scientific understanding of cleanliness in certain other concepts, and you will realize how wrong you are. Not that you will not be correctly taken, but you will understand how wrong you are, because there are so many other factors which are not factored in when you are taught about cleanliness, which knowledge systems exist in other societies in other ways. So cleaning with ash, cleaning with mud, etc., become very important ways of cleaning. And cleaning with soap is only one way of cleaning. Yes, I have read somewhere that in Rajasthan, people clean vessels with sand, and that is considered to be wonderful and good. People clean themselves with steam in certain parts of Africa where there is no water available. And that is considered to be a wonderful bathing technique. Yes? Yeah. So yes, you're right.
I think, ma'am, there's one more very good example. The similar thing is like boiling of milk and, spilling it over the stove is considered very positive in one particular community and is considered negative in another community. I mean, that kind of things, I think, similarly, like, I think I can now relate to many examples which you have given. So basically, resource utilization, which is available in the surroundings or the overall social understanding of doing a particular thing of that particular group plays a very, very dominant role in developing this. I would now say critical intelligence.
Yes, very right.
So,
very right.
because I have gone through concept of intelligence a lot, and I don't think there is a difference between critical thinking and a part of intelligence. It's
other kinds of intelligences.
yes,
Correct, very
it's
right.
one
Very
kind of, or maybe covering a very major part of definition of intelligence where critical thinking comes in.
very right.
So moving on to the next question. Good morning, you all. I am Irshad Ahmed, student of mechanical engineering, ma'am. Would you please elaborate the exact use of critical thinking and common sense, especially in developing a business idea?
I must say I'm a little, business idea is something I don't understand still. I'm not very familiar with the concept of business idea, but in general, I must say, common sense, as I was telling earlier, common sense is something which, again, we learn. So when you're developing an idea for a business or for a kind of a, for any kind of project, I'm talking about a project, if you're developing a kind of a project, if you're developing a kind of system, I think common sense, you should never take common sense for granted. You have to understand what is common sense in that particular context, and accordingly develop your critical thinking based on the data you find, based on what you think or what that society thinks, or you have to understand first the implications that project has, the people it has implications from. I mean, it should not become something like the Rajasthan project where you do something and then it negatively impacts the people you're doing it for, or they're not happy with it. So you have to maybe start with the implications first and understand who it has implications for, and then proceed to how you collect the data. Yeah, it is not always data, organization, and then implication. Sometimes in a business concept, maybe you have to understand the implications, understand the people who will be impacted by that implication, and then move on to collect data, and then see how they can best be organized and put to use. That is what I would say is possible, perhaps.
Ma'am, I think I agree to you because there are still no more questions. I'll request all the participants, if you have any further questions, please post it or you raise your hands. I'll unmute you for the asking the questions. And Irshad, sir, I think your question has been answered. Adding to the question of Irshad Ahmed, ma'am, I think the way you've given the water example of Gujarat, in the business model also, I think a person who's planning a kind of business should first get into the participant observation, what we call as a technique of data collection. Once you become a part of that, part and parcel of that community or that group which you are going to cater to later on, might give you many minute details which can be considered while developing the overall business plan or implementing the business plan also. I think that can be a approach to be used.
Yeah. And that is why I feel it is not possible to think of a hierarchy when we come to critical thinking skills. Yes? Because sometimes you have to start from the bottom and go up to the top. So you cannot say this is the rule. You know, it's like sometimes in research. We cannot think that we will only collect data first and then go on to the implications. If you're doing a certain kind of a research, you might even have to begin with what you think might be the outcome. Yes, sometimes you can even you have to imagine. Yeah, carry on. Tell me.
I think in the movies also. So I come from two backgrounds. One is education, one is filmmaking. So in the filmmaking also, there's this approach of writing the stories, and then the target group, identifying the target group and making them listen to the script or the story, at least the outline of it, and getting their feedbacks. And then getting into the production part of the film so that at least they are sure of some percent that people will watch it.
Maybe rewrite the story also.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Right, improving upon the story. And even after the whole production is done, the video is ready, the film is ready, then also it goes for the group viewing, just to understand whether it is okay or we might need to fix it somewhere. We might need to change the ending or add something to the climax so that people have find it more interesting to watch it.
I am a film buff, so I keep reading about film events, and I got to know recently that the climax scene of the ending of Titanic was changed.
Even Sholay, ma'am.
Sholay was changed.
Sholay was released. If my participants are aware of a film, it's an Indian film. It's a blockbuster in India. So it was released and it got flopped in one go. Nobody watched it. Nobody liked it. Then a few modifications were done in the film and it was re-released, and it is, I think, running till date in one of the theaters in Mumbai.
It is the beginning of modern
story
film
of
in India.
This. Yes. So I think we definitely need to get into the community for which we are going to work, and then develop any idea, any project, whatever we are working towards. One more question has come from Kwasi Baptiste. She is, I think, has already asked one question also. What tips can you give to teachers to help them encourage their students to think critically? Very good question. My question, basically.
Actually, students all think. All students think. It is we as teachers who do not recognize the thinking in students. And in a classroom, I would strongly say the classroom structure is very much is very often such that the classroom structure, the position of the teacher, the position of the students, it does not encourage them to express what they are thinking. Sometimes the topics we take up to the classroom do not encourage them to, not encourage, the topics make them diffident thinkers also. Because we forget that if we want to develop thinking in students, we have to take to them topics which they are used to thinking about. Okay, and you have to present them topics in a way they are used to thinking about. Like, for example, suppose it is a student group coming from a farming community. Okay, you take them theories about agriculture and ask them to think about it, the response will not be so good. But we take to them facts about agriculture, facts about how cropping is done, anecdotes about how sowing is done, how yielding is done. That will set them thinking in a very, very big way. So sometimes one way to make your students think is to start from where your students are. That is called, Paulo Freire is a person, for my participants, Paulo Freire was a person who was talking about critical pedagogy in a very big way. He was a Brazilian thinker. Paulo Freire talked about the banking system of education, where he said, treating the students as a blank slate and thinking that the teacher can come to the class and make deposits in the bank account of the students is the most flawed way of teaching. The best way to teach is to start a process of participatory learning process, where the teacher learns from the students as much as the student learns from the teachers. So if you start that process, if you participate in a dialogic movement, dialogue, where you move from the student to the teacher and then the teacher to the student. Every student thinks. Every student has the ability to think, but we have to know how to bring out the thought and how to take the topics for thinking to the students. That is important. And once you do, believe me, the amount of thought that students can express in thinking in classroom, the amount of thought that the amount of thinking process that even the so-called backward students express in the classroom is amazing. And I think that's the most fulfilling experience as a teacher. When you know that, yes, I thought that this student cannot think, but I give her the right topic to think. I tell her that I'm not judging what you are thinking. And she comes out with the most beautiful thought.
Right.
Yes.
Very, very, I think, yes, ma'am, very, even the participant has said, well received. Thank you for your this thing. It's a very, very good point, ma'am. I think because in the students, in the basically children, I would say, when I, again, going back to the intelligence, if I talk about it, there's a social intelligence, there is mathematical intelligence, then there's a linguistic intelligence. These are small, I think, I just consider them a small part of intelligence.
Interpersonal intelligence.
Yes.
Yes.
It is a very, very positive, for example, this course itself, this is not a technical course for engineering, but this is a very, very important course, as life skills is going to play a very, very relevant role in our futuristic lives, because end of the day, we are going to work with human beings.
True.
We are going to interact with people. So life skills or soft skills, which are now getting missing in the actual curriculum of any course, we are trying to provide it through a different platform so that we could understand. Now, I think my participants here can understand that what critical thinking is and how vast it is. It can be applied in any sphere of life, any way of life, and the results can be very different. And also, we as a human being can be a little less judgmental. Okay, if a person is not able to behave in social settings, he might be intrapersonally doing very good. He might be very creative. Then if he's not good in that, he or she might be good in mathematics. If it's not that, person might be linguistic. So can be n number of aptitudes which a person can have, and being good in one thing, being little less good in other thing can easily be, I think, is easily possible, which the first question was. So I think very good coverage of the content and very relevant to the life skill aspect of it, ma'am. So well presented and well answered all the questions. We don't have any questions, and we are also moving towards the end of this session. So I'll formally end this. So dear friends, we have covered different aspects of critical thinking and how to analyze critical thinking, the concept of critical thinking, then ways of gathering information for critical thinking, and then we have answered to the questions which were very pertinent, which were maybe actually, if I say, they were very simple questions, but the answers were not very simple. They have really made us think about them, and then how to implement these questions in the real life scenario. I think the field doesn't matter here much. In any field, I think I can apply all these questions. So very, very relevant, very, very important points covered. Thank you, ma'am, for such enlightening discussion, very friendly discussion also, keeping me involved, keeping all the participants involved in your interaction. And thank you all the participants for joining in. The strength was little less today. I don't know why. We have tried to share the information prior also. We'll see how we can include more participants into this, because this is very, very enlightening, very, very useful. So this video will be available on the MOOCs portal itself, on the MOOC for Development portal, on our Life Skill MOOC portal, so that you can access it and listen to it once again. and get benefited from it. If you know of some other participants, you can intimate them to watch this video also and to join in for the other live sessions where we are with our instructors, expert of the field, to answer our queries and enlighten us more on that. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, all the participants. Thank you, really thank you, heartfelt thanks to ma'am for being with us and giving your time to us for a detailed discussion, a very interactive session on critical thinking. Thank you. And any last words from you, ma'am?
No, thanks a lot, Monica. It was lovely having you over here. It was a pleasure. And thank you also for coordinating and conducting the meeting in such a wonderful way. And thanks to all the participants who are here and who are not here also, who have been asking me questions. I've been trying to answer some of their queries. Just wanted to inform them, those of you who have not been able to be here, you could also listen to it and ask me questions on it in the platform. I'll be open to answering them as long as my module is open. Thank you all. So can I leave the session now?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We are leaving the session. Thank you.
A special thank to Monica and Manas. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Manas sir in absentia. He is, I think, started for the office. He must be.
He must have. Okay. I'll leave the meeting. Bye.
Yeah.
Good day.
Bye-bye.
Good day to all of you.
Yes, ma'am.